I was 41 minutes into flatlining, twice when my mother-in-law leaned over my hospital bed, squeezed my hand and whispered, "Finally, 3 more days, and it's all mine." My sister-in-law, standing by the window with her arms crossed, said, "I already called about the car." I was intubated, sedated, supposedly unconscious after a cardiac event that dropped my pressure to 60/30 in the parking lot of Fort Liggett Regional. My rank was Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army, 17 years of service, and not one person in that room knew what that actually meant. If you're watching this from a hospital waiting room right now, hoping someone finally tells you the truth, comment the city you're in and hit subscribe, because what happened after they walked out of that room is going to make you furious before it makes you feel anything else. Loop 1 starts with a folder. A sealed, red-tabbed personnel folder sitting in a pelican case in my garage safe, marked Classified, Operation Silverlark, that my husband Marcus had been trying to get his hands on for 11 months, ever since his law firm's malpractice insurer started asking questions about a trust account that was $210,000 short. Loop 2 starts 3 years earlier, the night Marcus told his mother, in front of me, at Thanksgiving. "She just does paperwork on base. Mom, don't ask her about it. She gets weird." Loop 3 starts with a phone call I made 40 minutes after they left my hospital room. A call to a man named Ray Delgado, who mowed our lawn every Tuesday and Friday, who I'd hired 9 months earlier, under a name that wasn't Delgado, when we served together outside Kandahar. "Ray," I said, my throat raw from the tube they'd just pulled out, "I need the Whitfield financials pulled by Thursday, and you'll never have to mow another lawn in your life if you do this clean." His voice on the other end went tight. "Colonel," he said, "are you sure you're ready for this? I need to take you back, because none of this makes sense unless you understand who Marcus Whitfield thought he married, versus who he actually did." I met Marcus in 2011 at a fundraiser for a veterans legal aid nonprofit in Alexandria, Virginia, back when I was 31, freshly rotated stateside from an assignment I was legally prohibited from discussing with anyone, including him, for the rest of my life, unless a federal judge with the appropriate clearance ordered otherwise. Marcus was 34, an associate at Haller & Pierce. Sharp suit, sharper handshake. The kind of confidence that fills a room before he opens his mouth. I told him I worked in logistics coordination for the Army. That was true. It was also the least classified sentence I was permitted to say, about 11 years of my career, 6 of which I'd spent as an intelligence and medical logistics officer attached to a joint special operations task force, coordinating casualty evacuation routes and covert medical resupply for units whose names never appeared in any press release. I received the Bronze Star with Valor Device in 2009 for actions near Zabul province. I'm still not permitted to describe to my own family in specific terms. Marcus never asked twice. He liked the story he'd built for me better than the truth I couldn't tell him. "Logistics," he'd say at dinner parties, patting my knee under the table. "She basically runs a really big Excel spreadsheet." People would laugh. I would smile. The way you learn to smile when a colonel outranks you and says something absurd in a briefing, and you simply cannot correct him in front of the room. We married in October of 2013 at a vineyard in Loudoun County that his mother, Eleanor Whitfield, picked out and paid for, a fact she reminded me of at least once a year for the next 11 years. Eleanor was 68, a retired hospital administrator from Richmond who had, by her own account, raised Marcus alone after his father left, though I later learned Marcus's father hadn't left so much as been asked to leave, after Eleanor discovered his affair with a hospital board member, a detail Eleanor rewrote so many times over the decades that even she seemed to believe her own revision. Eleanor's fixed expression toward me, from the first dinner, was a kind of pitying superiority, the look you give a service dog that's done a trick you find quaint but unnecessary. "It's sweet that you kept working after the wedding," she told me at our rehearsal dinner. "Marcus's salary alone could carry you both quite comfortably." I said nothing. I had, at that point, a security clearance that outranked her son's entire firm's billable hours combined, and I said nothing, because that was the job. Silence was the job. Marcus's younger sister, Brooke, was 26 when we married, a real estate agent in Fairfax with a fixed personality trait I came to recognize within the first month. Calculating entitlement dressed up as sisterly warmth. Brooke would ask to borrow things. My car, once, absurdly, my dress uniform jacket for a military chic-themed engagement party, an ask I refused so flatly that she didn't speak to me for 6 weeks. And each request came wrapped in the assumption that whatever I had was functionally communal property, because, as she put it once at a barbecue, you don't really need much. You're basically a homebody. I deployed 4 times during our marriage. Brooke, to my knowledge, never once asked where. Here is the arithmetic nobody in that family bothered to do. My base pay by 2020, as an 05 with 17 years in, was roughly $108,000 annually, before special duty pay, before hazard pay, before the tax-free combat zone exclusions. That meant certain years I brought home more net income than Marcus did after his firm took its cut. I had a thrift savings plan that, by the hospital incident, held $431,000. Money Marcus assumed, when he thought about it at all, was government stuff, boring, small. My military pension, vesting at 20 years, was projected at just under $52,000 annually for life, with survivor benefit options I had structured, quietly, 3 years earlier, after the first time I caught him lying about money. That first lie was small, the kind you almost let go. A missing $11,000 from our joint account in March of 2021, which Marcus explained as a bar exam continuing education thing, an explanation so specific and unnecessary that it was, in retrospect, the tell. I didn't confront him. I did what 17 years of intelligence work trained me to do. I observed, I documented, and I waited for the pattern to repeat. Because a single data point is an anomaly, 2 is a coincidence, but 3 is a signature. By the time I was lying in that hospital bed in 2024, I had 4 years of signatures, a boat slip lease Marcus never mentioned, a recurring $900 monthly wire transfer to a Delaware LLC that traced back, through Ray's contacts, to a woman named Lindsay Pruitt, 32, a paralegal at Halloran Pierce, who Marcus had been seeing for at least 14 months, based on a hotel loyalty account that accumulated points every second Tuesday, the same night Marcus told me he had deposition prep running late. I found out about Lindsay 8 months before the hospital, and I did not scream, and I did not confront him across the kitchen island, the way the movies tell you a betrayed wife is supposed to. I called a woman named Colonel Renata Ashworth, retired, JAG Corps, 26 years of service, who I'd served alongside during a court-martial in 2016, and who now ran a small family law practice in Arlington, because, in her words, I got tired of watching good officers get outlawed by civilians who think a uniform means stupid. I told Renata everything. She told me one thing back, and it's the thing I carried into that hospital room 9 months later like a stone in my pocket. Diane, she said, do not let them see you coming. The moment they think you're weak is the moment they overreach. And overreach is the only mistake people like this ever make. Let them overreach. So I waited. I kept working at the base personnel readiness office, the desk job I'd taken after my last deployment, the one Marcus and Eleanor and Brooke all understood to be the sum total of my career, because I let them understand it that way, because 17 years of operational security doesn't turn off just because you retire the uniform. I watched Marcus grow bolder, leaving his phone unlocked on the counter, the specific carelessness of a man who has never once been caught at anything and has concluded he never will be. Lindsay Pruitt's name started appearing on his calendar, under initials, LP7PM, the kind of code a smart man uses when he thinks the woman he's deceiving isn't smart enough to break it. The hospital happened on a Tuesday in April, and I collapsed in the parking lot of the base clinic during a scheduled cardiology follow-up for a heart arrhythmia I'd been managing quietly for 2 years, a genuine, documented condition called supraventricular tachycardia I had never told Marcus about, partly out of habit, partly, I'll admit now, because some small cold part of me wanted to see what he'd do with information he didn't control. What he did was call his mother before he called an ambulance. I know this because Eleanor's arrival timestamp at the hospital, according to the visitor log Ray pulled later, was 14 minutes after my admission, meaning Marcus had called her from the parking lot, before EMS had even loaded me into the rig. I regained partial awareness in the recovery bay, roughly 90 minutes after the episode, still intubated, still sedated enough that my eyes wouldn't open, but conscious, present, in a way the monitors apparently didn't register. A phenomenon called anesthesia awareness that I will be grateful for, in a strange and permanent way, for the rest of my life. I heard the door open. I heard Eleanor's low heels on the linoleum, her purse set down on the vinyl chair with the decisive click of a woman settling in to enjoy something. And I heard her lean close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive that always made the back of my throat itch, and whisper, finally, 3 more days, and it's all mine. I did not move. 17 years of training does not disappear because you are lying in a hospital bed with a tube down your throat. I laid there, and I listened, and I catalogued, the way I had catalogued convoy routes and casualty manifests and enemy troop movements. Because the mind does what it is built to do, and mine had been built, deliberately, by the United States Army, to remain still and record everything while chaos happened around it. Brooke arrived 9 minutes later, heels faster, lighter than Eleanor's. Is she? Brooke started. She's under, Eleanor said. She can't hear anything. Brooke exhaled and said, Okay, good, because I already called about the car. The dealership said they can do the transfer, as long as we have power of attorney set up. Marcus said he's finalizing that this week. A pause. Softer, almost giddy. Her Highlander's only got 22,000 miles on it. Eleanor made a small sound of approval. Marcus deserves this, she said. All those years married to a woman more interested in the army than in him. I heard Marcus's voice from the doorway, quieter than the other two. The voice of a man who wanted the money, but hadn't yet built the stomach to say so out loud, which told me he was still, in some buried way, capable of shame. That would matter later. Mom, he said. Not here. Eleanor waved a hand I could hear in the rustle of her sleeve. She can't hear us, Marcus. The doctor said 72 hours minimum before there's any real chance of... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. They left at 4:52 in the afternoon. According to the nurse's log I requested later, what I'd actually been placed in was a medically induced coma to manage cardiac stress after the arrhythmia triggered a secondary event, not the fictional 3 days to live pronouncement Eleanor apparently invented, because doctors don't talk like soap opera villains. Dr. Priya Anand, my actual cardiologist, told me later she'd used the phrase, "We'll know more in 72 hours. A phrase Eleanor curdled into something far more convenient for her purposes. I laid there another 6 minutes after the door clicked shut, making certain the hallway was clear. And then I did the only thing I could with a throat, this raw, and a right hand that could just barely reach the burner phone I kept taped beneath the bedrail. A habit left over from a career spent assuming every room might be listened to. I dialed Ray Delgado. Ray, I rasped. I need the Whitfield financials pulled by Thursday. Full picture. The Delaware LLC, the boat slip, the hotel account under LP, and pull my Silver Lark separation packet from the safe. I need Renata to see it before the hearing, not after. There was a long silence on the other end, long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then Ray said, low and urgent, Colonel, are you sure you're ready for this? Because once this moves, it moves fast, and there's no putting it back in the box. I closed my eyes, even though they were already closed, because some decisions you make with your whole body. I've been ready for 4 years, I said. Do it clean, Ray, and you'll never have to work another job in your life if you handle this the way I know you can. His voice cracked just slightly, an old soldier's version of emotion, tight and economical. Copy that, ma'am, he said. Consider it done. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you, you already know the specific, cold clarity that settles in once you decide to stop absorbing it quietly. Hit subscribe now, because the next part of this story is where that clarity turns into a plan, and I promise you, It is worth every second of the wait. Marcus filed for divorce 19 days after I was discharged from the hospital, a fact that still, if I let myself think about it too directly, takes my breath away with its efficiency. He had a process server hand me the papers in the driveway of the house I'd made the down payment on. Papers his firm's own senior partner, Halloran himself, had apparently drafted personally as a favor, which told me exactly how much this divorce mattered to Marcus's professional survival, not just his personal one. Attached to the filing was a request for temporary spousal support. An unequal division of marital assets weighted heavily toward Marcus, on the theory that his career earning potential outweighed mine. And this was the part that made even Renata go quiet on the phone when she read it. A motion questioning my fitness to manage my own finances, citing documented cardiac and cognitive episodes. A motion built on the foundation of a single conversation I'd had with Dr. Anand about temporary post-sedation confusion, a normal, expected, 12-hour symptom that Marcus's new divorce attorney, a man named Grant Sallow, had apparently decided to stretch into a permanent narrative of incapacity. Grant Sallow's fixed trait revealed itself the very first time I met him, at a settlement conference 4 weeks after the filing. A performative professional arrogance that required him to explain basic legal concepts to me slowly, despite the fact that I held a clearance he'd never come within 100 miles of qualifying for. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "not Lieutenant Colonel, not even Ms. I understand this is difficult, but my client wants the financial picture to reflect reality. You've spent, 20 years doing administrative work. Marcus is a partner-track litigator. The math isn't complicated." I looked at Renata, her legal pad completely blank, because she'd memorized the entire financial picture the night before. "Counselor," Renata said, in a voice so calm, it made Grant Sallow's shoulders tighten involuntarily. "I'd recommend you pull your client's Delaware LLC filings before your next conference. You'll find the math considerably more complicated than you think." Eleanor's contribution to the proceedings arrived 2 weeks later, in the form of a sworn character statement, submitted to support Marcus's fitness claims, a document she apparently drafted herself and had notarized at her bank, in which she wrote, among other things, that I had always prioritized her military hobby over her family duties, and that she had never once in 11 years heard Diane discuss any actual accomplishments from her career, leading the family to reasonably conclude her role was largely clerical. I read that sentence 4 times, sitting in Renata's office with my Silver Lark separation packet still sealed on the desk between us, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very still. The particular stillness I remembered from a briefing tent outside Kandahar, the night before an operation, when fear and clarity finally stop fighting each other and just merge into a single, useful thing. Brooke, for her part, could not resist adding her own layer, texting me directly, an act of either supreme confidence or supreme stupidity, and I've never fully decided which. A message that read, "Hey, no hard feelings, but are you gonna fight the Highlander thing?" Marcus said it's already basically his, since he's on the loan too. LOL. I did not respond. I forwarded the screenshot to Ray, who added it, with a note of something close to amusement, to the growing case file he'd started calling, only half-jokingly, the Whitfield Overreach dossier. The pace of discovery that followed moved faster than I expected, even accounting for Ray's abilities. A former Signals Intelligence NCO, who now ran a boutique financial forensics consultancy out of a converted row house in Alexandria, a cover I'd insisted on precisely because nobody suspects the gardener. By early June, 6 weeks before the scheduled hearing, we had assembled a picture Grant Sallow clearly never anticipated answering for. The Delaware LLC, registered under the name Sunrise Marina Holdings, had received 41 separate wire transfers from Marcus's personal account over 18 months, totaling just under $63,000, traced directly to a joint brokerage account Marcus and I had opened in 2015. One he had quietly drained by roughly $4,000 a month for a year and a half without my knowledge, using an authorization I later confirmed he'd forged. The signature on the withdrawal form, obtained through subpoena, did not match mine in 14 separate forensic markers. Our handwriting expert, retired FBI document examiner Carla Voss, flagged for the record. The boat slip, it turned out, belonged to a 31-foot cabin cruiser named Second Wind, docked at a marina in Solomon's Island, Maryland, purchased 11 months earlier under Lindsay Pruitt's name, but paid for, according to the closing documents, with a cashier's check drawn on funds traced back to that same drained brokerage account. Lindsay Pruitt herself had been employed at Halloran Pierce for 2 years and 3 months, roughly matching the timeline of the earliest hotel loyalty charges. The picture that emerged wasn't just infidelity, which family court judges see every single day and mostly shrug at. It was infidelity funded by systematic forged financial theft from a marital account, a different category of problem entirely, one with a name Grant Sallow would eventually have to say out loud in open court. Conversion of marital assets, a civil offense with potential criminal exposure, his own firm would be professionally required to report. The medical piece resolved on its own timeline, in a way that mattered more in that courtroom than any spreadsheet Ray produced. My follow-up cardiology evaluation in late June confirmed what Dr. Anand had suspected, but hadn't been able to fully diagnose at the time of the collapse. A structural issue with the mitral valve, congenital, asymptomatic for years, until the SVT episode exposed it, requiring a minimally invasive repair procedure I underwent in early July, 4 weeks before the hearing. A real surgery, a real recovery, real scars along my ribcage I'd carry for life. Physical, undeniable proof that whatever Grant Sallow's motion had implied about cognitive episodes, there had never been anything fake about what happened to my body that April afternoon. If anything, the surgery made the fitness accusation look worse in retrospect. A fact Renata pointed out to Grant Sallow's office in a letter that prompted an unusually long silence before their response came back late. The sealed personnel packet, Operation Silverlark, sat through all of this in a locked drawer in Renata's office, untouched, because Renata's instinct, honed over 26 years of watching civilian courts misunderstand military service, was to save it, to let Marcus and Grant Sallow build their entire strategy on the assumption that I really had spent 17 years doing paperwork, so that when the file finally opened, the gap between what they believed and what was actually true would do more damage in a single moment than any accumulated financial evidence ever could on its own. Overreach only works, she told me over coffee in her office, 3 weeks before the hearing. If you let them keep reaching, the second you correct them early, they adjust. Let them build the entire house on the wrong foundation, Diane. Let them. So I let Eleanor keep talking. At a lunch, neither attorney technically sanctioned, Eleanor cornered me in the parking garage stairwell and said, with the relish of a woman who believes she's finally winning, "You know, dear, even the judge is going to see it. 17 years, and you can't produce a single citation, a single medal." Marcus's friends in the JAG office told him your file is practically empty, sealed for privacy, which we all know means there's nothing to seal. I looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "Eleanor, be careful about what you assume is sealed for privacy versus sealed for a reason." She laughed, a short dismissive bark. "Diane, sweetheart, you were a secretary. You don't have to keep pretending otherwise. Not with family." I said nothing else. I let her have the last word, because Renata was right. The last word only matters if the story ends there, and I already knew this one wasn't close to over. If you've ever had someone look you dead in the eye and tell you your entire life's work was nothing, and you had to stand there and let them believe it a little longer, because you knew the truth would land harder later, comment "let them" below, because that's exactly the strategy that got me through the next 6 weeks, and it's about to pay off in a courtroom in front of 40 people who thought they knew exactly who I was. The hearing was scheduled for the second Tuesday of September, in the Fairfax County Circuit Court, Judge Patricia Renner presiding, a jurist with a reputation, according to Renata, for running an unusually tight courtroom, and an unusually low tolerance for what she called theater dressed up as testimony. The gallery that morning held more people than I expected for what was, on paper, a divorce and asset division hearing. Eleanor in a navy suit she'd clearly bought for the occasion, Brooke beside her, scrolling her phone until a bailiff asked her to put it away, Lindsay Pruitt sitting 3 rows back, visibly uncomfortable, having been subpoenaed as a witness to the LLC transactions, and, scattered through the remaining benches, 6 or 7 of Marcus's colleagues from Halloran Pierce. There, I suspected, more out of professional curiosity about the firm's malpractice exposure than any real loyalty to Marcus himself. Beside Renata and me sat 2 people whose presence nobody in Marcus's camp had anticipated. Retired Brigadier General Harold Miskowski, 71 years old, silver-haired, ramrod-straight, even-seated, who had commanded the task force I'd served under during my final deployment, and retired Colonel Frank Sarno, JJ Corps, who had overseen the legal review of Operation Silverlark's declassification request I'd filed 8 months earlier, the moment I first suspected this divorce might require it. Grant Sallow opened confidently, walking the court through what he characterized as a straightforward asset division, complicated only by Mrs. Whitfield's medical history and limited earning documentation. He referenced my personnel file directly, reading from the redacted, unclassified summary his office had requested, the only version anyone outside a specific clearance tier was ever permitted to see, describing my occupational specialty in the blandest terms: logistics and administrative support, various posts. He turned toward the gallery, toward Eleanor, and said, with theatrical pause, "The truth is, Your Honor, my client's wife was never a soldier in any meaningful operational sense. She was, functionally, a secretary. This narrative of some hidden, heroic military career is, respectfully, a fiction constructed for sympathy." Eleanor, 3 rows back, nodded so vigorously I heard her earrings click. Renata rose slowly, unhurried, the way she always moved when she knew exactly how much time she had, and intended to use every second of it. "Your Honor," she said, "opposing counsel has just characterized my client's 17 years of federal service as a fiction. I'd like to enter into evidence Exhibit 14. She placed the sealed red-tabbed folder on the clerk's desk. "This is the declassification order, signed 6 weeks ago by the Department of the Army's Office of the General Counsel, releasing, for the limited purpose of this proceeding, the operational summary of Lieutenant Colonel Diane Whitfield's service record under Operation Silverlark." A murmur moved through the gallery. Grant Sallow half rose. "Your Honor, this is the first." Judge Renner cut him off with a single raised hand. "Counselor, sit down. I've reviewed the declassification order in chambers this morning. It's properly authenticated. Continue, Colonel Ashworth." Renata called General Misiowski. He walked with the unhurried authority of a man who had briefed 4-star generals, and did not find this courtroom intimidating, and when asked to describe Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield's actual role, he did not raise his voice, because he did not need to. The room had already gone silent around him. "Then Major Whitfield," he said, "served as the Senior Medical Logistics and Intelligence Liaison Officer for a Joint Special Operations Task Force operating in and around Zabul Province from 2008 to 2009. Her responsibility was coordinating casualty evacuation corridors for units conducting operations that, to this day, remain classified at a level above what most attorneys in this room hold clearance for. On the night of March 11, 2009, during an ambush that pinned down a 12-man element approximately 4 kilometers from the nearest secure extraction point, then Major Whitfield personally rerouted a medevac corridor through hostile terrain in real time, under fire, coordinating directly with the pinned element's radio operator for the better part of 90 minutes, resulting in the successful extraction of all 12 soldiers, 7 of whom sustained injuries that would have been fatal without the timeline she constructed. She was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor device for that action. I signed the recommendation myself." He paused, and turned, deliberately, toward the gallery, toward Eleanor, whose face had gone the color of chalk. "She is not a secretary," General Mishkovsky said. "She is the reason 12 men have grandchildren today, 5 of whom would not exist if Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield had done what everyone in this room apparently assumed she did for 17 years. Which is nothing." The silence that followed had a physical weight to it. I watched it move through the gallery like a pressure front. Brooke's mouth actually falling open, Lindsay Pruitt sinking lower in her seat, as though she could disappear into the bench, Eleanor's hand rising to her throat, in a gesture that might have been shock, or might have been the beginning of understanding that the ground beneath her had just been pulled away entirely. Colonel Sarno testified next, walking the court through the forensic financial evidence with clinical precision. Marcus's forged withdrawal authorizations, the Sunrise Marina Holdings LLC, the pattern of transfers timed to Lindsay Pruitt's hotel stays, the total converted from marital assets now standing at $63,412, plus interest. Grant Sallow did not cross-examine either witness at length. A man watching his malpractice exposure metastasize in open court has limited appetite for extending the proceeding. Marcus took the stand last, and it was there, under oath, with his mother in the third row and the woman he'd been paying for with stolen funds in the fifth, that whatever remained of his composure gave out. Renata asked him a single question about the withdrawal authorization bearing my forged signature, and he sat for 11 full seconds. I counted, the way I'd once counted seconds on a radio silence, before he said, quietly, "I didn't think she'd ever need to know." Judge Renner's gavel came down not in anger but in the flat, procedural finality of a woman closing a matter that had, in every meaningful sense, already resolved itself. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I'll be entering findings that reflect what this court has heard today, including a referral to the Commonwealth's attorney regarding the forged financial instruments, and I'll note for the record that opposing counsel's earlier characterization of Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield's military service will not in any way factor favorably into this court's view of his client's credibility going forward." If you've ever waited years for the moment someone finally said the thing out loud that you always knew was true about yourself, you already know exactly what that gavel sounded like to me. Like this video, subscribe if you want to see exactly what happened to every single person who underestimated her, because the consequences that followed were more precise and more permanent than anyone in that courtroom expected. The financial settlement, finalized 8 weeks later, awarded me the marital home outright, full recovery of the converted funds plus $22,000 in legal interest and fees, and a division of Marcus's future earnings structured to account for his full partner track trajectory rather than his current associate pay, a distinction that cost him far more than he'd anticipated when he filed the original motion. The Commonwealth's Attorney's Office opened a formal inquiry into the forged authorization within 2 weeks. Marcus, facing potential felony exposure, negotiated a plea to a lesser charge involving restitution and probation, a resolution that triggered a mandatory disclosure to the Virginia State Bar, which opened its own parallel review of his fitness to practice law, still pending as of this recording. Haller and Pierce quietly parted ways with both Marcus and Lindsay Pruitt within 6 weeks of the hearing, citing conduct inconsistent with firm standards regarding conflicts of interest and financial integrity. Lindsay relocated to Ohio the following spring, into a role with considerably less prestige. The Second Wind, the cabin cruiser purchased with converted funds, was seized as part of the restitution order and sold at auction for $19,000 less than its purchase price, a loss that landed, appropriately, entirely on Marcus. Brooke lost her position at the real estate brokerage that November, not directly connected to any of this, technically, but the timing, combined with a noticeable cooling among her client referral network, did not go unnoticed by anyone who'd been paying attention. She sent me one more text message, 4 months after the hearing. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." I didn't respond immediately, because some apologies need to sit in silence before they mean anything. But I did, eventually, write back 3 words. "I know now." It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement, which is different, and which was all I had to give at the time. Eleanor's reckoning was the slowest, and, in its own way, the most complete. The Whitfield families standing in their tight social circle in Richmond absorbed the story within weeks, the way small, insular social worlds always do, and Eleanor found herself, for the first time in her adult life, on the receiving end of the exact pitying superiority she'd spent 11 years directing at me. She wrote me a letter in December, 4 handwritten pages, admitting, in language stiffer than any apology I'd ever received but genuine in its own careful way, that she had built an entire understanding of who you were, based on what was convenient to believe, rather than what was true. I framed the letter, not out of sentimentality, but because it represented something I'd waited 17 years for from that family. Acknowledgement that the sacrifice had been real, even if it took a courtroom and a general's testimony to make it visible. Marcus and I have spoken exactly twice since the hearing, both times through Renata's office regarding logistics of the settlement, both times brief, professional, and free of the particular cruelty that had characterized our final year together. I don't know if he's genuinely different now, chastened by consequence in some lasting way, or simply better at concealment, and I've made peace with the fact that it isn't my responsibility anymore to figure out which. What I do know is this: I spent 17 years being told, implicitly and explicitly, by the people who were supposed to know me best, that my sacrifice was smaller, quieter, and less real than it actually was, because it was easier for them to believe a convenient story than to ask a single honest question about the woman standing in front of them. I think about that a great deal now, in the quiet after all of it. How many people are sitting across dinner tables right now, being reduced to something smaller than they are, simply because nobody in the room has bothered to ask what they actually carried, and what it actually cost them to carry it. If there is one thing I would ask anyone watching this to take with them tonight, it's this: the next time someone in your life mentions their work in a single flat sentence, and moves on quickly, consider that the flatness might not be modesty, and it might not be nothing. It might be the sound of someone who has learned, the hard way, that most people don't actually want to know. My cardiologist cleared me for full activity in November. My valve repair holds. I sold the Highlander in October, not because Brooke had wanted it, but because I was finally ready to buy something entirely, uncomplicatedly mine, and I drove that new car past the vineyard, where Eleanor once told me, with such absolute certainty, exactly how comfortable Marcus's salary alone could make me. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into you once you've stopped needing anyone's permission to know what you're worth. And after 17 years of practiced stillness, that quiet feels less like an ending and more like the first honest breath I've taken in over a decade.